Bonjour à tous, bienvenue à cette seconde édition des 20 Minute Masterclass organisée par l'ANDRH Junior et SAP-Successfactors sur le thème « Le marché du travail en 2020 » avec Karie Wyllierd, notre invitée de ce jour. Alors avant de rentrer dans le vif du sujet, quelques détails logistiques. Ce webinaire est enregistré, il sera consultable et partageable à la demande sur un lien que nous afficherons en fin de webinaire. Tous les participants sont en mode muet pour des raisons évidentes de pratique au regard du nombre important de personnes enregistrées. La présentation de Karie sera faite en anglais et nous vous invitons à poser vos questions au fur et à mesure de sa présentation via la chatbox ou le panel Q&A que vous voyez en bas à droite de votre écran. Vous pouvez poser vos questions à la fois en français ou en anglais, à votre convenance. Si vous la posez en français, je ferai la traduction pour Karie. Elles seront consolidées au cours de la présentation et nous y répondrons en fin de présentation qui durera environ 20 à 25 minutes. Vous recevrez à la fin de cette présentation un email de remerciement avec un document en français qui résume l'ensemble des données clés qui auront été abordées durant cette conférence. Et pour finir, n'hésitez pas à commenter et partager au sujet de cette conférence via le lien hashtag qui s'affichera sur toutes les slides qui est 20MMCFR. Alors, pour contextualiser un petit peu ce webinaire, il fait suite à une première conférence sur le thème « Reconnecter l'entreprise avec elle-même » qui avait été animée par Stéphane Hugon et qui abordait les enjeux de la mutation, des mutations sociétales et les modifications des usages au sein des sociétés, notamment à travers l'apport des nouvelles technologies digitales. Karie Wyllierd, elle va nous présenter un peu une réponse à cette vision sociologique française en nous présentant sa vision du marché du travail en 2020, étayée à la fois par son expérience et une étude mondiale qui a été récemment menée par Oxford Economics auprès de 2200 responsables RH. Donc avant de passer la parole à Karie, je vais vous la présenter en quelques mots, et cela en anglais. So, Karie Wyllierd is the co-author of the book 2020 Workplace, which was released a few years ago and which is currently available on Amazon if you wish to purchase it. She's also the Senior Vice President of Learning and Social Adoption at SuccessFactors, an SAP company, and she was former CEO of Jambook, which is now a product of SAP offer. Jambook is a social learning platform that was acquired first by SuccessFactors in 2011, and now SuccessFactors being part of SAP, it's part of the SAP catalog. Karie has held different positions and as a role as a Chief Talent Officer and Chief Learning Officer in different multinational companies, one of these being Sun Microsystems. So good morning, Karie. Thank you very much for being with us today, as I know it's quite early for you in San Francisco, about the middle of your night. So thank you very much, and now the audience is yours.
Oh, thank you very much. And well, for me, it's good morning, everyone. I truly wish I could have delivered this in French. My husband, who is a long-term pharmaceutical scientist, is back in school to learn French, so he can teach French at the middle school level. So unfortunately, you don't get him for this session. So in the next 20 minutes, let's run through what is the 2020 workplace going to look like and how in HR can we begin to prepare for that. That's based on two research sources. We ran a 2,200-person survey when we were doing the research for the 2020 workplace, trying to find out what people were thinking about in terms of their next jobs. And we just completed a comprehensive 27-country survey with Oxford Economics, where we looked at what are people looking for in the future for their jobs. We also asked executives what they were thinking. And we made sure that out of our employees, half of them were millennials, since half the workplace will be millennials by 2020. So here's just a few factors that are at play in terms of the future workforce. We asked executives what was concerning them about the future workforce, and these kinds of things like globalization, increasing regulation was very high on the list. If you're in something like journalism, your whole business model is being disrupted, and just the amount of complexity. We had 5 major research findings from our survey with Oxford. I'm going to run through each of these. First off, work has a new face, and in almost every country there are significant shifts that are happening in our labor force. One of those is that millennials are going to be part of the new workforce. There was a large baby boomer generation, a smaller Gen X, and then a large millennial generation again. And so the more that baby boomers exit the workplace, the more millennials are coming in. And they're a lot the same about what they want, but then how they want it and some of the ways in which they want it delivered are a little different. What matters most to employees isn't the same as what executives think, though. So when we ask people what's important to you, we found differences there. And both executives and employees agree that the need for leadership's never been greater, and we're not yet getting ready. Therefore, one of the big mandates for 2020 is learning, not only for getting our leaders ready, but also for ensuring that our employees are ready with the new skills they will need. So let's run through each of those on the new face of work. Just a quick example here of the generations. When I said there were 2 larger generations, this is the example is the U.S., but France, which I have done as well, looks the same shape where there is a large generation in the baby boomers, a large generation of millennials. So I'm just going to age the population for you. If you look in 2010 here, I've put in the EU, and France sits right in the middle of the EU. You can see in 2010, baby boomers made up just under half of the workforce, and Gen Y, or millennials, were coming into the workforce. There you can see the size of Gen X is much smaller. And by 2015, you can start to see baby boomers are leaving the workplace, and we now have millennials in the workplace. And then finally, by 2020, you can see that the millennials are making up half the workplace. So that's why it's important for us to understand, are there any differences for what millennials want, and how do we get ready for those differences? Another big shift in the workforce demographics is that executives are saying they're going to increase their use of a combination of contingent, intermittent, or consultant employees, which is really interesting, because that's going to mean, how do we think about our compensation plans? How do we do training? How do we make sure that they're qualified? Will we need more HR technology to manage that group? One of the things that one of the men at Oxford Economics says is it's difficult to get executives to agree at a level of 83% that the sun rises in the east, and yet here we have that 83% are agreeing they're going to be relying more on this flexible workforce, and so that's going to be an important part of the future as well. Here's some of the things the executives are concerned about: the globalization of the labor supply. When I was looking at the French results, I found that hiring people with base level skills, so this 48% here, the third one down, is actually the highest one for them. French executives are a little more confident overall in many of the answers here about their ability to lead a global workforce. But in terms of reaching base level skills, a little bit more concerned about them than the rest of the world. And when we ask people, are you making progress towards meeting your workforce goals? About half said they were making moderate progress, and about a third saying good progress. The French were a little more bullish about their processes to work at meeting goals, but a little less confident about do they have a defined vision for the future. And overall, around the world, the lack of employee longevity and loyalty was the #1 concern for executives about why they were not able to make progress on their workforce goals. And then #2 was lack of adequate leadership. That was reversed for France. So for France, lack of adequate leadership was the #1 barrier to meeting their workforce goals. And then you can see a couple of others here in order as well. Another thing that holds us back from really understanding how we can work with the workforce is, do we have good analytics and data? And only 39% say they have ample data to be able to do that, or use quantifiable metrics, or know how to extract meaningful insights from the data. Now, the interesting thing about the French executives is they were the highest in the world at saying they were willing to use analytics to assess employee performance. So that was a very strong result for French. Our second finding was about millennials. And there's written in the press a lot of differences about the millennials, but when we ask them what do they want as part of their employee value proposition, it wasn't that different from everyone else. Every generation considered compensation the most important factor, and is very closely followed by a focus on careers and training and development. So their top priorities were about the same as the non-millennials. Even when it came to retirement plans, there was a large focus for millennials as well as non-millennials. The difference was not even statistically significant. So the what of what millennials are seeking seems to be about the same. And there's a lot of myths out there. For example, millennials care more about making a positive difference in the world. Well, it's not that they don't care about making a positive difference in the world, but when choosing their top satisfiers, they don't necessarily make the list. So we asked people from a long list to identify their top 3, and only 21% picked making a positive difference in the world, which is about the same as non-millennials. So I think we're all shifting to have a focus on it. Achieving work-life balance is more important to millennials than non-millennials, and as you can see, it's about the same. Now, that's not true for the French workforce. For the French workforce, over 66% picked achieving work-life balance as important to their own life, and also having working at a company that's goals matches its own in terms of values was very important to the French. So the French are meeting more the myth of work-life balance importance in terms of what will I pick than millennials are. And then learning and growing is more important to millennials than meeting income goals. In fact, these income goals are very important. It's one of the reasons they go to work. This doesn't mean they don't want learning, but it just means that if I can only pick 3 things, making sure I've got the right income is one of those. Where they are different is they want more feedback than non-millennials. So they want about 50% more feedback, which means roughly once a month they want a formal sit down with their manager to really understand their performance and their development. And then the millennial difference is really in than I think how it gets delivered, how our employee value proposition is delivered, not what. So using modern technologies, modern tools, and modern benefits and offerings. So the third one was then what matters most at work. And so here we were looking at what is it that out of all of the potential benefits employees say they want. And here again you can see this compensation. And then in the gray beneath it you can see what executives said they offered extensively. So employees are saying we want competitive compensation, but executives are saying, well, we don't offer that quite so widely, although executives do offer bonuses and merit pay. Interestingly, one of the biggest concerns of French employees was wage stagnation compared to the rest of the world. So as you can see, this compensation really does matter a lot to everyone, but particularly to the French. And then when you look at, we asked the question of executives, what do you value most as top employee attributes? And then we also asked employees, what do you think your employers want? And this was interesting in that there was a fairly big gap between what employees value and what employers say they want. So this education was number one, then loyalty, then ability to learn, and so on down the list. And even though job performance and results is somewhat touted as what employers actually want, it was much lower on the list. Now, French respondents, the employees, put job performance and results a little bit lower and were a little more aligned with executives in terms of what they were looking for. And then the fourth topic we were looking at was leadership cliff. And partially this leadership cliff is about, are we going to be able to lead in a global environment? If looking back in 1990, there were only about 3,000 true multinational companies, which is really astounding to consider today, with over 892,000 subsidiaries around the world. And it's estimated that the number of top 500 multinationals that are well, actually by 2025, McKinsey is saying nearly half of the top 500 multinationals will be coming from developing countries. So there's enormous growth occurring as well. Executives cite the lack of adequate leadership as the number 2 impediment to building a workforce to meet the future business objectives. In France, it's the number 1 impediment. In the rest of the world, it's right behind loyalty. And when you look at the right-hand side, you see that only 52% of executives say they have the skills they need at their company to manage talent or inspire employees or lead a global workforce, although the French are a little more confident about that, are able to drive change or can lead a diverse workforce. With only 34% saying they can lead a diverse workforce, and through immigration and changing birth rates and aging workforce and a young workforce coming in, it's obviously imperative that we be able to lead a diverse workforce. And employees agree with this, that we're not getting ready as leaders to prepare for the future. And finally, the development mandate. And it's important to have this development mandate because employees are concerned about obsolescence. That is their number 1 concern. 40% say that they are concerned about being able to have the skills they'll need for the future. And then they're also concerned about their advancement opportunities, inadequate staffing, and then again, this wage stagnation was much higher for the French. When they look at, are they prepared for the future, 50% say they have the skills they'll need now in 3 years, but their company is not able to give them to the training they need to get there. This was actually a bigger concern for French employees. So this is already low, but it's even lower for French employees. And of course, one way we consider being able to develop people is not only having a learning culture, but giving people interesting assignments, which can include relocation. And unfortunately, both employees and executives agree that our cultures aren't such that if you can't have development in other ways, you'll just catch it through the culture, with only really less than half saying that there was a learning culture. What is interesting about the French employees is that they are a little bit more willing to relocate than other employees are in other countries. And so part of how they may seek development is by moving to other countries. And one of the important things is going to be to ensure that we are giving employees a path for developing their skills for the future. Less than a third of companies are planning for succession. So just some key takeaways as we get to the end here. Development of employees and leaders is going to become the new employer differentiator. And the French were nearly 20% more likely to agree with that statement. That's going to mean, are we prepared to have learning, and are we doing succession planning, and are we offering feedback, particularly to millennials, at the rate that they want to get it? Number two, I think it's going to be time to look at our compensation strategies. There's clearly, with some recovery of the economies going on, people are thinking that they have options, and doing compensation the same way we've done for the last 10 years may not hold on to our highest performers. Another finding we had was that HR still has room to grow in pushing towards boardroom strategy setting. And if we're going to have a workforce strategy that we're acting on, it's going to require HR to continue to move there. And then we must prepare for a more diverse, flexible, and contingent workforce. So, are you ready? And with that, I'll open up, Terry, to questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Karie. Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you for this presentation. I have a few questions related to the data you just showed. Typically about relocation, you mentioned that French, the people that were questioned in France were more willing to relocate. My question is this due to the fact that the economic situation is quite difficult at the moment, and people tend to find nice positions abroad, or is this an intrinsic, genuine will that across generation people have always, still want to move, relocate? Is it due to the economic environment, or to a genuine will?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a couple of factors that play in. First off, language. So, most working at a professional level French have some skills that allow them to, move to another country. There's a joke in the United States that someone who speaks 2 languages is bilingual and 3 languages trilingual, but with only 1 language, they're an American. So the French have typically at least a couple of languages because of a smaller region, so a little more willing to relocate. I think, people tend to follow opportunity. And so, with opportunity in a different country, perhaps even only in some cases, a few hundred kilometers away, they can seek opportunity and growth in a faster developing country.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I had another question about the, you mentioned that basically cross-generation, there isn't that many differences, except that compensation is the key motivation through all the results of the survey. In terms of differences, can we say that between millennials and the other generation, what really makes a difference is that they went through a different crisis with an environment quite difficult, and you mentioned that they were eager to get some feedback in terms of development. They were really focused on development. Is this not due to the fact that they've been moving quite more often than the other generation in terms of companies or position? And this is simply driven by the environmental conditions.
Right, right. Well, I think there's a couple of things. First off, the Corporate Leadership Council, which is a part of the Corporate Executive Board, runs a global study as well on what drives engagement with employees. And in 2010, they saw that compensation was a little bit lower because globally we were in more of a recession. Now that there seems to be some recovery, there's a little bit of built-up wage stagnation concern, and so people are feeling a little more confident about pursuing compensation, I think. So we see, even among non-millennials, an increased focus on compensation. Now, for millennials, they had the unfortunate circumstance of coming into the workplace during the midst of what was pretty much a global recession. And when you come to work, then typically you're taking a lower level job, or so you either are unemployed for a longer period of time getting a job, or underemployed while you establish yourself. And so then as you begin to get established, this focus on compensation as kind of a make-up strategy, I think, is really important as well.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned that leadership was quite a big concern amongst HR and people and companies. How is this to be tackled? Is this part of the responsibilities of, schools, institutions, university? We know that in France we have good universities, very good engineering school. People tend to get their degrees and look for jobs, sometimes relocating. Would you say who should be responsible for developing these leadership skills? Is it sitting within the manager's role? HR, what is HR responsibilities in developing these leadership skills? And can we think that the academic in the different countries are doing a proper job in preparing people to be great leaders? Right,
right. Well, of course, the biggest opportunity we have is to develop people on the job, because these academic programs are very good for developing some basic skills, but they tend to be, 1, 2, some nowadays maybe even 3 or 4 weeks, where you go back and forth. But nonetheless, it's not a significant portion of time. So the most important place is to develop it on the job. And one of the interesting findings, when we asked leaders, what do you value in employees, the attribute of being a follower, willing to follow, was much stronger than willing to be a leader. So I think what we need to do is figure out ways to help people learn leadership skills while they're not in a formal leadership position. So can we begin to put people on leading projects and give them a lot more opportunities to lead sideways with their peers in order to develop the skills early? Because developing leadership skills takes time. We can't wait until the moment when the baby boomers are out the door and then start development. We have to think ahead of that. It's probably a 5-year process to really get someone to develop skills. So even if you're young and coming in, being able to have the responsibility for the interns and leading the interns can be one way to develop those, or to have a special project assignment. So I think we have to shift our management thinking away from thinking of it only as hierarchical roles that are named as a job inside a company to thinking of leadership as a skill set that you can learn through some special projects.
Yeah, no, this is true. And as you mentioned, it is a long-term process to develop leadership. And something that's striking me is that more and more people tend to have a 2-3 years tenure in a position. So either they change within companies, but this is quite recent. Otherwise, they simply changed from one company to another. And I think that there is a huge difference both between the generation now. I mean, the youngest generation tends to be moving more and more between different companies, and there is also a huge gap, huge difference between what we can see in the U.S. and what we just experienced we just see in France per se. And in terms of generation, I mean, the X generation, or even before the baby boomer, they used to stay within a single company for almost all their career, and which is quite a huge change with what we can notice nowadays. Okay. Okay. So thank you very much, Karie, for your time with us. I don't think there is any other question. I will move back to French just to complete the presentation. If you could move, if you could just click to the next slide, please. Ok. Merci. Donc, merci à tous de nous avoir suivis sur ce second webinaire 20 minutes masterclass. Le prochain webinaire aura lieu probablement vers la mi-décembre sur le sujet fonction RH et performance. Je vous invite à poursuivre donc la discussion autour de cette présentation sur le hashtag qui s'affiche sur votre écran. Et comme je vous le disais initialement, vous pouvez, cette conférence a été enregistrée et vous pouvez la revisionner ou la partager avec votre entourage sur le site successfactors.com/fr dans l'onglet ressources du site web, où vous trouverez tout un tas d'informations, à la fois sur des informations thématiques et des informations sur les produits SuccessFactors. Voilà. Il me reste à vous remercier tous de votre participation, et nous espérons vous retrouver prochainement donc sur le prochain webinaire. Un dernier point, nous organiserons donc un tirage au sort avec le livre de Karie Wyllierd à gagner parmi les participants à cette conférence. Donc l'heureux élu aura le plaisir de recevoir ce livre. Et nous entrerons en contact avec lui pour avoir l'adresse, son adresse postale pour envoyer le colis. Merci à tous, bonne fin de journée et à très bientôt pour les 20 minutes masterclass. Thank you very much, Karie. I will call you later on. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.